All right. So we're holding in Tanya chapter 2. We talked about the connection um of the nails to the brain, that the nails of our toenails cannot survive without the brain. And that shows the intrinsic connection that the nails have with the brain. And and that means that the toenails of a son essentially is connected to the brain of the father, because the brain of the son is connected to the brain of the father. As you see, the drop that came from the brain of the father comes to the brain of the son, and creates a new brain. So um the Alter Rebbe is explaining that tzaddikim, righteous, wise people of every generation, people with special, unique souls, are comparable to the brain, so to speak, of the corpus of the Jewish people. And therefore, even a Jew who might view himself or herself as a toenail in the corpus of the Jewish people, meaning they may feel insignificant and so on and so forth, need to realize you're not a nothing. You're not, on your own, but actually you're part of the body of the Jewish people. And by the way, you might not be a toenail. You might be a heart. You might be a vital organ. So, don't get yourself so down. But even if, let's say, objectively speaking, somebody is a toenail, you're still connected to the brain, and you should be connected to the brain. And the better that circuit is connected, the better off you are. So the Alter Rebbe will further elaborate on this point of connecting the quote unquote toenail to the brain, in that every Jew should connect themselves with um, the the special souls in every generation. So we explained before that the tzaddikim and chachamim is loosely translated as righteous people and wise people, of the heads of the Jewish people of every generation. They're considered like the head and the brain. And the holy soul of every Jew, as we know, every Jew has two souls. There's the mundane or animalistic type of soul, and there's the holy soul of every Jew, gets its nurture, its sustenance, its spiritual sustenance from God through the soul of the tzaddik. So we see that there's an intrinsic connection between the Jewish people, to the heads of the Jewish people. That means that there's a certain type of nurture, vitality that Jews receive from the heads of the Jewish people in a number of ways. So there's different types of Jewish leaders, and it's important to clarify what type we're talking about in this chapter of Tanya. So one classic Jewish leader might be a rabbi or a head of a yeshiva, of a Talmudic seminary, who's teaching Torah, transmitting information, which is of course very important. That's one type of Jewish leader, a teacher essentially, teaching Jewish Torah information. And then another type of Jewish leader is a rav, a posek, somebody who is adjudicating law. And in other words, two people have a court case and they come to the rabbi, a special kind of rabbi, not a teacher rabbi, but a rav, as it's called, somebody who will adjudicate and declare this is the law, this is what you need to do. Sometimes it's a dispute between two people. Other times it could just be a question. I dropped my spoon, my dairy spoon in my meat dishwasher. What's the law about that, right? So that's a kind of, it's not so much teaching information as much as guiding you and directing you. As a matter of fact, you should do this or do that. So that's a rav. And then there's wise people. So they're not necessarily teachers of information. They're not telling you, matter of fact, do this or do that, but they're telling you how to be, they're instructing you. They might be a personal counselor or guide in how you should lead your life, of course, from a Jewish perspective. So in that sense, That's a third type of a Jewish leader. So you have a rabbi or teacher, you have a rav, and you have a counselor, a spiritual counselor, if you will. And then a fourth type is a tzaddik, a righteous person who is a role model of how to live your life. Now, often one or two of these four qualities can exist within the same person. Your teacher could also be your practical guidance counselor, but not necessarily. Sometimes you have a teacher who's just very bright and has a lot of information to give, but doesn't have that personal relationship with you. But then you can have somebody who has a personal relationship with you and has wisdom and intuition into your personal life, but isn't the greatest scholar necessarily. And sometimes maybe you might even be a bigger scholar than that person, but they have a certain sense of intuition into being able to guide you. So we have four different types of rabbis or Jewish leaders, which play different roles: teachers, a rav, a counselor, a role model, different types of leadership roles. However, when we talk about the heads of the Jewish people, that's a completely different category. The heads of the Jewish people is a category of Jewish leaders that their role is that your soul should receive a certain sense of spiritual vitality and sustenance from their souls. And by attaching yourself, by plugging in, so to speak, to their souls, it gives you a newfound feeling and excitement for godliness. You know, I like to joke every year when I go to New York and spend time by the Rebbe's Ohel and things like that, and the Rebbe's Shul 770, that it's the time that I go to recharge my batteries. And it's really true based on what we're saying here in Tanya, that a Rebbe is not just a rabbi who serves a particular function, but it's somebody who really recharges your spiritual batteries, or you can say plugs you in to the source. Yeah.
Oh, I just talked to the heater guy. Do you have a half a second?
So, so it's understood from this that we're going to call it a Rebbe because that's my best understanding of what the Alter Rebbe is describing over here, is that a Rebbe is not just a rabbi. He's not just a teacher or a decisive of Jewish law or a guidance counselor or a role model. He's all of that and more. But really all of those details don't really get to the crux of what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe is somebody who affects your soul on a very deep level. So with that introduction, let's read it from the text. Again, JewishArcadia.com/7881. Uvazeh yuvan. In the English, that's the words, this explains the comment. In fact, if you do Control F and you type in those words, then on your computer, if you type in this explains, you'll get to that exact spot on the page. Just a nice little hack on Windows. So, with this we can understand the statement of our sages in the Talmud. The Talmud says in Tractate Ketubot, al pasuk, on the verse Uladav Kabai, that you should attach yourself to him, meaning the Torah tells us in Deuteronomy at the end of Parshas Nitzavim, the fourth to last Torah portion in the Torah says that you have freedom of choice. You can choose life, you can choose death. Of course, you should choose life so that you and your offspring will live. And then it says, you shall love Hashem and attach yourself to him. So what does it mean to attach yourself to him? Is it a 120 volt? Is it a 220 volt? Like, how do you attach yourself to God? Is there a rope that you can tie to your hands and you'll be attached to God? So what does that mean? So the Talmud explains on this pasuk Shekal hadavik b'talmidei chachamim, that whoever attaches himself or herself to talmidei chachamim, which literally translates as students of scholars, but over here we're using that term broadly to apply to a rebbe. The Torah considers it as if you attached yourself to the Shekhinah itself, in other words, to the divine presence itself. So the Talmud does this in a way of a question. It says, is it possible for a person to attach himself to the Shekhinah? Rather, through attaching yourself to these heads of the generation, it's as if you attach yourself to the Shekhinah. And the Alter Rebbe doesn't just say attaching yourself to the Shekhinah, but uses the word mamish, saying literally, meaning this is not an exaggeration or some euphemism that our sages are trying to tell us. It's a good thing to attach yourself to a Rebbe. And therefore, it's kind of like as if you attached yourself to the Shekhinah, to God. But rather, what the Alter Rebbe is saying that the Talmud is teaching us that Rebbe is a way for us to attach ourselves to God directly. That means that when we attach ourselves to a Rebbe, we are feeling the light of godliness in our souls, and thereby we're attached to godliness. Now, how that's a little hard to fully comprehend. What does it mean? You're attaching yourself to a tzaddik, to a Rebbe, to a very unique kind of Jewish soul, one that's considered the head of the Jewish corpus, and somehow that's like attaching yourself to the Shekhinah. But based on everything we said earlier, it all makes sense. The Alter Rebbe continues, because through attaching yourself to these scholars, meaning these Rebbes, kishurais nefesh ruach neshama shel ami haaretz, umiyuchades b'mahusan harishon v'shashim sheb'chachma idla. The soul, and that's whether you're talking about the level of nefesh, ruach, or neshama that we talked about in the past weeks, of the simpletons, their souls are connected and united with their original source, which is in the supreme wisdom, as we explained last week, how there's 4 worlds, and in each world there's 10 expressions of divinity. So the highest expression of divinity in the highest world, that's the source of every soul. And when we attach ourselves to a Rebbe, we are attaching ourselves to that highest source of our soul, Shehu Yizbarich v'chachmasei echad. And not only are we attaching ourselves to an expression of divinity, the supreme wisdom of God, but as we explained earlier, God and his wisdom are one. As we explained earlier, that he is the knower, he is the knowledge, he is the known, and there's really no separation between all that. So just as all portions of our body have to be connected to the brain, including the hair, and by the way, not just the hair on our head, but even the hair on our toes, and the toenails, all of those have to be connected to the brain. And if there at any point there's a separation between the brain and those body parts, then they won't continue to exist. Those body parts will stop growing. I got disconnected.
Oh,
Still there? I'm not sure why my connection cut out. Everything technically looked like it was working. But I guess this is what we were talking about. That if the connection of the toenails and the hair is disconnected from the brain, then the toenails don't grow, the hair doesn't grow because there's no brain attached to it, right? So I guess in some similar analogy, if you don't have internet, then the Zoom function ceases to exist. But anyways, right? Everything has to have a practical relevance in our daily life. So that was Hashem's way of saying, see, this is for real. Anyways, getting back to what we were saying, Sorry. Oh, I see. So we're saying that that the if if those parts of the body are severed from the brain at any time, then they'll stop working. They'll stop functioning. And the same is true. Similarly, I should say, similarly, it's true that when the Jewish people wish to have the divine light shining in their souls and their souls to be operating at optimum capacity and awareness and feeling for divinity, for godliness, that happens through the brain, so to speak, of the Jewish people, meaning the rebbes of the generation. And that's how all parts of our souls, whether it's the nefesh part, the ruach, or the neshama, can be connected with our original source, which is the supreme wisdom of God, which is, in the analogy, is like the brain of the Father, so to speak, which of course is one with God himself. And so the more a person is attached to the Rebbe of the generation, the more his own godly light, the more his own soul will be illuminated from the light of the Shekhinah, which is shining through the brain of the sun, so to speak. In other words, through the sages and the rebbes of each generation. And that's why, if you look in Hasidic culture or custom, you see that that Hasidim are always very attached to their rebbes. Why? Because the whole purpose of Hasidism is to bring a divine vitality in the Torah that we learn and in the service of God that we do, by uncovering the godliness that's latent within every Jew. And the way to uncover that godliness that's latent within every Jew is by uncovering the fact that they have a Jewish soul, by uncovering that there's godliness in there. And how do we do that? By attaching ourselves to the Rebbe. So the more a chassid, the more a Jew is attached to a Rebbe, the more their soul will be on fire. But then comes a question: what if somebody is not attached to the Rebbe? Are you not Jewish then? You're not Jewish if you're not attached to a Rebbe. That's very extreme. That's very exclusionary. He says now in the brackets, what about those who rebel or deliberately go against the sages of the generation, the brains of the Jewish people, the Rebbes of the time? In other words, what he's saying is, if you're telling me that the way that our Jewish soul becomes alive is through attaching ourselves to the Rebbe, one could say that if somebody's against the Rebbe or not attached to the Rebbe, then they have no divine light shining in their soul. You know, again, if you're comparing it to the toenails, if the toenails are disconnected from the brain, the toenails die. They're gonna fall off. They're gonna stop growing. So the Alter Rebbe says, no, it's not exactly the same, because even those souls still get something from the Rebbe of the generation, even if they don't know it, even if they're against it, even if they're protesting it. However, they get it in a different way. How do they get it? The Alter Rebbe continues, Yenikas nefesh ruach neshama shalahem bebechinas acharayim shel nefesh ruach v'nishmas talmidei chachamim. The nurture, the vitality of their souls comes from the hind part of the souls of the Rebbe of the generation. So, what does it mean, the hind part? When a person wants to give something to somebody he loves, you want to give your close friend a birthday present, right? You turn towards him and you show a lot of affection and care and connection with him. It's you show a shining countenance, as it's called in fancy English, towards that person. However, when you have to pay your taxes and you write the check to the IRS, it's not exactly the same way. You throw it over your shoulder, right? It's like, okay, take it. Take the stupid check from me. I don't want this. I don't want to have to deal with this. I don't want to have to deal with you. Not until next tax season, right? Get out of my face. And that's literally an expression, get out of my face. I'm just thinking this now, People say, get out of my face, right? In other words, you could exist, you could serve the function you're serving, just not in my face, right? Nobody wants the IRS in their face. Because yes, you're giving to the IRS. Yes, you're paying your taxes and you're, of course, being honest as a Jew should. But you do it in a way, I don't like doing this, right? Not in my face. But a friend, somebody who you love, it's in my face. I appreciate being face to face with that person. So when you're talking about giving, there's giving in a way of face to face, meaning that the giver and the receiver are connecting with each other. But then there's a way of throwing something over your shoulder. Yes, you're giving. You're giving it to the person who's behind you, but there's no deep connection and attachment between the giver and the receiver. And the same is true here. Those who are rebelling or deliberately not connecting to a Rebbe, they still get their spiritual inspiration and attachment to godliness, and they're still connected to God, of course. However, they don't get it in the way of a face-to-face kind of giving, but rather it's kind of like it's being thrown over their shoulder. And therefore, the light of the Shekhinah, the light of Hashem that's in their souls, is not shining at fullest capacity, and therefore they don't have the same feeling for godliness until they create that connection with the Rebbe, with somebody who's considered ahead of the generation. Then they're able to let their souls shine brightly as it should. And this is kind of like the idea that there's a Moses in each generation. What's the function of Moses? Moses, of course, taught the Jews the Torah, right? That's how we know what every word in the Torah actually means. So, but he wasn't just a teacher, to teach information. Nowadays we have Google. Who needs Moses if you have Google, right? For information in 2024, who needs a Moses? However, Moses is obviously not just in 2024, but even back in the 40 years that the Jews were in the desert, Moses was a lot more than just a teacher. He was a lot more than the Jewish Google. Moses was essentially the soul, the head part of the soul of the corpus of the Jewish people. And so therefore, when we attach ourselves to the brain, then we're attached to the source of the brain, which is the Father, which is Hashem. So in short, just to summarize, based on what we explained before, that through the tzaddikim and the chachamim, the righteous wise men, meaning the Rebbes, the Moseses of each generation, the masses attach their souls to Hashem. And this explains what it says in the Talmud, that by attaching ourselves to Torah scholars, we're not just talking about any scholars, but we're talking about like a Moses of a generation. That's how a person attaches him or herself to the Shekhinah. Because in order to get proper vitality from those Rebbes, from those Moseses of the generation, we have to be attached to them. Just like parts of the body need to be attached to the brain to get life from them. And that's why there's such a big emphasis in Hasidism to be attached to a Rebbe, because that enables the light of the Shekhinah to shine brightly in the souls of the masses. However, lest you think that if you don't do that you won't have any connection with godliness, he says that even if you rebel and even if you're against the Moses of the generation, which, by the way, even Moses himself had rebels. He had Datan and Aviram, he had Korach, and so on and so forth. However, even those people still have an essential attachment to Moses, and it's just not, a face-to-face attachment. It's maybe an over-the-shoulder type. So basically, what the Alter Rebbe is telling us is, don't have your relationship with Moses of the generation to be one of a taxpayer and the IRS, but rather let it be one of two very close friends who have a deep personal bond with one another. Thank you very much for listening, and please join us again next week, Monday at 12:30 p.m.